Hello YouTube and welcome back to the channel. My name is James and today I'm going to be doing a weekly roundup, so the books I've been reading for over the last week and a half. And the last week and a half has actually been quite a productive reading time for me because of my university schedule. I finished one essay and didn't have to start the next one for a few days, so I actually had 3 consecutive days where I'd finished a book, so I'll be talking about those 3 today. So the first one is a book that I mentioned that I was starting to read a few weeks ago, and that is Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. So this book doesn't really need any introduction at all, but obviously I'd heard about it, but I'd never found it in a charity store or a secondhand bookshop. But I actually found it buried deep inside a wicker basket in my parents' house. So when I was back home a few weeks ago, I was just rummaging through this wicker basket full of books, very tattered books, and found this right at the bottom. Obviously I'd heard about the controversy of Rushdie and the fatwa that was given by the Ayatollah of Iran, but I didn't really know anything about the book. And I think a lot of people are in that position. They know that Rushdie had to go into hiding, and the huge uproar about it and the ban as hate speech in India. But I'm not sure how many people actually read it. So to give those context, I haven't read it. It follows 2 characters. So you've got Gabriel and Saladin, and as the names suggest, they represent the angel Gabriel and then also a demonic character. And at the same time, the book is narrated by potentially the devil. You're never really told explicitly, it's kind of only teased. And there are different narrative streams, but the first one follows these 2 characters, Gabriel and Saladin, and the first scene is them falling out of a plane that explodes over the English Channel. And as they're falling, a miracle happens whereby Gabriel, obviously he's an angel, so he starts to fly, and the other clings to him, and they kind of fall into the ocean and swim to the shore. And from there, you're split into these different narratives of following these 2 as they move to England effectively, and it's about how they're treated by the Brits, and especially the border police. And it's really all about moving to a different culture and how much of your own culture do you have to give up, or should you give up some part of your culture to integrate? What does that mean? Does that mean on a cultural level, or can you maintain your own culture? And these are all the questions that Rushdie is asking from his own perspective of growing up in India and moving to the UK. The second narrative and the third, they're both dream sequences that Gabriel has. And one is at the foundation of Islam in a city of sand. And it's about Gabriel representing the angel Gabriel and giving the commandments to Muhammad, who's called Mahmud in this book. The names aren't very subtle, and I see obviously they're not meant to be, and that is where the majority of the criticism of Islam comes from. In the book, Gabriel is kind of this schizophrenic character and doesn't really have control of his own thoughts, and is incredibly erratic. So when he speaks to Mahmud, it's not coherent, and also he doesn't really know what he's meant to be saying, and often he says nothing, and it's just assumed that Mahmud will know what to say. And so then the criticism is that Mahmud comes down from the mountain, and when he delivers the next part of the Quran, it's kind of fits his narrative and fits what he wants, which, whilst obviously is a criticism of Islam, could kind of be extended to all religions, and how this book is held to be sacred, but at the same time fits very neatly into the patriarchy and men's perspective. And then the final stream, which is the one that I found most incredible and lovable, was a story set in contemporary India in a small village that is kind of built into a tree. I assume that's meant to represent like the tree of life. And one of the young girls that she builds toys, but she's visited. She has a vision and becomes a messenger, and is covered with butterflies, and leads this village who is full of some of them are believers, some of them are converts, and a few are skeptics. And she leads them to the Indian Ocean, and in order to have a pilgrimage to Mecca. And it's kind of this whole hodgepodge of different religious stories. And it's claimed that she would be able to part the sea like Moses, but eventually that group end up drowning in the sea. And it's this interesting part as the novel's ending of did they drown physically in order to be awoken spiritually. And it's an incredible narrative, and each different narrative is so beautiful in the way that it adjusts. The language changes depending on who the narrator, that this demonic figure, is following. For example, when Gabriel is having a schizophrenic break, a psychotic break, and is going around London and is trapped in kind of the belly of the beast, the underground, and can't escape, and is having hallucinations of this woman that he was having an affair with in Mumbai. It fits so perfectly, and Rushdie is, a master of interweaving this fast plot, but at the same time these religious allegories, and also literature. It references a lot of literature and some poetry as well. And to be honest, this is the first 5-star book that I've read for months. The last one being On the Road, the autobiography of Oliver Sacks. So couldn't recommend it more. And really, the last thing I'd say about this is that going into it, knowing that a fatwa had been placed on Rushdie's head, I thought it was going to be so offensive. And it was also banned in India as hate speech, but it wasn't. Obviously, it's a critique of Islam and religion more generally, but that's not offensive in itself. Living in a liberal society, you should be able to critique any idea. Religion does not have a free pass, especially when it impacts so widely the lives of billions of people, some for better, but some definitely for worse. And really, I think I agree with Rushdie, where it's books are, in their own right, aren't offensive. You are the one that takes offense. So if you find it offensive, I would recommend putting it down and not reading it. No one is forcing you to read it, as Rushdie said in an interview about the topic. So the second book that I read was for a book club, and it is Nutshell by Ian McEwan. And I think just from this hardback cover, you can tell what it's going to be about, or from the perspective that it's going to be. It's got a little fetus curled up, and that is who the book is being narrated through. It's this young fetus in the 3rd trimester, and it's just about to be born, but it's incredibly wise, and it's got all of its knowledge from, hilariously, I think, from the BBC World Service and the podcasts that his mum is listening to over these 9 months. So it's incredibly literate. It's quoting from a whole array of literature and poetry, and it's, for me, that just has so much comedic value already. But to a second layer to this book, which embarrassingly I didn't realize until after I'd finished it and was watching an interview with McEwan, is that it's a retelling of Hamlet, and it should have been so obvious. The names are incredibly similar. The uncle is called Claude, so obviously Claudius, and the mother is called Trudy, so Gertrude, and they have Danish food, and it's also, the book is quoted, the play is quoted, sorry. So I should have been obvious, and I kind of hope I should have been told that beforehand, because it does give another layer. But really, this book is wonderfully creative. It's so composed. There was no point in the plot that I thought, oh, it's going too fast or it's going too slow. Um, and if obviously if you knew it was a retelling of Hamlet, you know exactly what is going to be happening. The mother and the uncle plot the murder of Hamlet's father, and it goes through. So it's not a whodunit. You already know. It's are they going to get away with it, um, and kind of why they did it. It's so gripping, even though from the off, um, if you know the plot of Hamlet, you know what's going to happen. And really, my perspective on this book was summed up wonderfully by a Goodreads review, and it just said, at this point in Ian McEwan's career, he'd written, I think, well over a dozen books, and you can just tell he's a master of his craft. Every word you can tell is so well chosen, and it runs like poetry. The flow, it hits the different syllables, and it's incredible. And I couldn't recommend it more highly. And obviously, one of the reasons I love it is this stream of consciousness that you're getting. It's this monologue, and I've kind of realized after this last year of reading a lot more, and coming across books that have that frame, is either I love them or I hate them. And in this one, I absolutely loved it. And in another book up there by Martin Amis, that Time's Arrow, which is told in reverse. It's time, like life goes backwards basically, almost Benjamin Button style, and that's told from the consciousness of a Nazi doctor, and that I loved. It was gripping, and it was a really interesting frame, and the book wouldn't have worked. And the same with this, the book wouldn't have worked if it wasn't told from this perspective, and so I loved it with those. In the next book that I read, which has a very similar style and is told in that monologue style, I really disliked it, and that is Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And really, I should have liked this book. This book is almost written for me. It follows a young man, he's 25, called Changes, which that should have been a trigger warning right there. It follows this young Pakistani man as he moves to the US. He gets a scholarship at Princeton, comes top of his class and gets accepted into this very niche boutique valuation firm. And that's where the title comes from. It's a play on words, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, because obviously it touches upon the topic of terrorism and 9/11, but also it's about sticking to the fundamentals, fundamentals in terms of asset valuation. So as a business student, it should have been for me. And as it follows this young man, he falls in love with a fellow student, but she is distraught by the loss of her first love. He dies of cancer, and it's can she get past it to fall in love with Changes, and she does somewhat, but then falls into it to a really dark place and ends up taking her own life. And after that, Changes decides to move back to Pakistan. It's Pakistan is on the brink of war with India, and he wants to be in his home country to help his parents and his siblings. Um, and so this story is told from his perspective as he meets this man who he sits down with to have coffee, this American tourist, or so you're told to believe. But then as the book progresses, you find out that each of the characters aren't really what they seem. Changes is, the reluctant fundamentalist, is it that Changes is a terrorist and is really on a mission to kill this American, or in reverse, the American is kind of portrayed as potentially a CIA operative, and as the narrative comes to a head, there's this contrast where you're unsure whether Changes is going to kill him or vice versa, or neither. And for me, that is where the first problem I have with the book, it's so cliche. There's this moment where they're sat down at the cafe, and the American leans back in his seat and changes notices and discusses a bulge in the American's jacket, which could potentially be an underarm holster. And like, no, like that's so unbelievable. That would never happen. Um, and this is meant to be, it's meant to be realist. And so you're completely drawn out of the narrative, and it's so unbelievably unbelievable. And the way, and that there are a few moments like that where it's like, no, like the American has a satellite phone, and these sorts of things you keep on being drawn back to, because obviously he wants to keep that part of the plot going, but it's incredibly unbelievable. And then the second thing is it's told by through the voice of changes, and he's meant to be 25, but at the same time he's portrayed as this elderly wise figure, and that clash doesn't work at all. And he quotes Sufi poetry, and uh, it just doesn't work, and it's very unbelievable. And as I said before, it really draws you out of the narrative, and it keeps on hitting on these different cliches. um, the cliche of um, a fundamentalist after 9/11, the cliche of uh, a young woman being distraught by the lost love and taking her own life, and even that, she is an incredibly 2D character. And to be honest, there are more discussions of their failed sex life than her own personality and her own struggles. And so, really, for a book that should have appealed to me and was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, I couldn't get on board whatsoever. And really, it's blurbed by Philip Pullman and Rachel Cook, and some people that, I respect their opinions, but for me, it just didn't work. So they're the three books that I've been reading over the last week. Hopefully, you found that interesting, and hopefully, you found some books that you'd be interested in reading. And if you've already read them before, let me know what you think. I think I had some quite different um, perspectives on some of those books. So let me know what you thought about them. And then hopefully the next book I'll be doing is another wrap up video. So I'm currently reading A Leg to Stand On by Oliver Sacks, and Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. So hopefully I'll see you then.